they dropped their anchor right in the middle of the inlet and set up camp with both of them sleeping inside the fuselage to spend the night in the airplane. About 3:30 in the morning, they hear a knock on the plane. Yeah. And they look out the cockpit, and there's a couple of boats out there of locals fishing. The only thing they said to him was, we hunt duck. And he said, well, that's nice. Everyone back to bed. And they crawled back into bed. Took off the next day to go to Nome. That was pretty good. Then the next story is they were trying to get to Tokyo, and they flew past this volcano with a lake inside. It's actually an inlet. There's a way to get out to the ocean from there. And it's called Burton Bay, and they looked down on it and said, wow, that just looks like a little model that some kid would play with their boats in, and they thought that was really interesting as they went on by. Well, their plan was to fly on the east side of those islands all the way down to Tokyo, and they were watching very carefully this blanket of clouds that were west of the islands. And the further south they got, the closer the clouds got, and pretty soon they couldn't see anything underneath them. And so they decided to turn back and head back and try to land at Burton Bay. Well, when they got back over top of where Burton Bay should be, clouds had come in from behind them, and they were VFR on top. You know what that means. No way to see the ground. And like I mentioned, there's no instrument landing facility anywhere. And so if you look at the top of the picture up there, you see another little island. This little island right here is called Kitoi Island. It's about 13 miles away from Burton Bay. And that volcano was sticking up out of the clouds. They could see that little piece of rock sticking up. So what Lindbergh decided to do at this point was, I'm going to fly down the face of the mountain right over with my floats over top of the trees and hope I see the water before I hit it and land on the ocean. And he did that. It took him 2 trips down through before he made it all the way down to the surface and landed. If you read the book, she'll tell you how scared that made her. It was pretty spooky. So now they're there landed on the open ocean, and again, rocky shores, no place to pull up on the beach. And so they dropped anchor again and made plans to spend the night, and they did. The next morning, they were surprised to find that the Japanese had sent a ship to help them, the Shinchiri Maru. And they discovered that this ship had shown up when they woke up in the morning and eaten breakfast, and they hear singing coming from outside the airplane. So they stick the head out of the airplane again, and there's a crew of Japanese Navy sailors rowing their boat to help over to their airplane. And they were singing songs to keep time with the reports. And so they invited him to come aboard in a big ship to have breakfast, and which they did. And then they came back later in the day to try to get the aircraft started, and it wouldn't start. They had taxied around for quite a long time in this foggy, damp weather trying to find a place to beach the plane. And they figured that they fouled the plugs, and so the engine really wasn't going to start. And so now they're kind of stuck. They spent another night there, which the anchor line broke, and they were drifting to shore, and they had to call the help from the boat, and they sent another rowboat out there and captured him, loaned him an anchor, and they spent the night tied up there with their borrowed anchor. The next day, the ship towed them 13 miles to Burton Bay, where they could get on calm water, hit the beach, and pull all the plugs out, clean them up, and get the engine started again. And so they then finally left the third day and flew on down to Japan. I recommend that you guys that are still flying stay away from that fly down the face of the volcano trick. Seems pretty spooky. So when they arrived in China, another historical event was actually taking place. In 1931 in July, the Yangtze River flooded in China, and it's the worst flood in recorded history. It killed over 3.7 million people. And when they showed up there, they instantly became the most capable aircraft in the country, and the government immediately asked Mr. Lindbergh if he would help them by doing survey flights to check out where the refugees were, where should I send equipment and things, because their airplanes just couldn't cover the land that was in trouble. So every day for about a month they took off, and they would do aerial photography, like you see the picture there on the right, and they would do sketches of where the people were hanging out, where the little enclaves of people were, in order to send out relief efforts. After about a month of doing that, they had a little accident. Now, what happened was when they first started doing that survey flights every day, they would tie the plane up to the back of the HMS Hermes, which was a British ship that was tied anchored in the river, and they would let it drift behind the ship every night. Well, this is floodwaters. There's debris coming down the river day and night, and there's all kinds of boat traffic, and they were really worried about the plane getting damaged at night. And so the ship offered to hoist the plane out of the water every night and set it on the back of the ship, which they did for many, many nights. One morning, they were getting ready to launch on the next flight, and they were lowering the plane in the water, and it got turned sideways, drug a wingtip in the water that caused the aircraft to capsize, and it was damaged. Anne was inside the airplane. Charles was on top. He liked to ride like a horse on there in order to release the cable. And they got her out. Nobody was injured, but they hoisted the plane back up on the ship and went, now what? Because the plane was damaged, the wing mostly. And so the British offered to sail the ship with the plane on it back to California and get the plane fixed at Lockheed, and which they did. So that ended their trip. They had planned to fly to Guam and Wake and Midway and Hawaii on the way back home. They didn't get to do that part of the flight. So Lockheed fixed the aircraft, and another year later or so, they launched on that second trip I told you about all the way around the Atlantic Ocean. So that's the history of the trip I'm interested in, the North to the Orient trip. Now I'll tell you a little bit about the project. In short sentences, the goal of the project is to build an exact replica of that airplane. I say exact with quotes because I don't think I could cross an ATIS these days and not get shot down without a radio and a transponder. So I think I will add a few pieces of modern electronics, but I'm gonna try to hide those and make it look as original as possible. And then my plan is to reenact this flight, go do the North to the Orient trip, and then we'll go from there. So the first thing we need to do is build the airplane. And see my helper there in the shop. That's part number one, by the way. The first part I built, it's an aircraft, it's a fuselage diaphragm. They call it a diaphragm. It's a fuselage frame. It happens to be the biggest one, number 5. You can see the jig there on the left, me putting that thing together. It's multiple layers of thin strips of wood all glued together. It takes a number of days to get that laid up. And then I pull it out and sand it up, and that's part number 1. I've got 2 done now. Only 3,000 more parts to go. But I just started in April, so we'll get going. As far as the trip goes, my plan is to, like I said, reenact the flight from New York to China, and then from there I want to go down to Australia, because he never made it there, and go around to Australia and go to New Zealand, and then it's island hop on the way home. I've yet to decide whether I can actually make the trip over to South America from there. There's not much between New Zealand and South America, so maybe an island like Easter Island. But if you zoom in on Google Earth of Easter Island, there's one beach on the whole island. It's about 50 feet wide, and so and it opens right up to open ocean. So kind of spooky. It's not very protected. But so we'll see. I might even have to raffle or take recommendations on where in the South Pacific I should go. So that's that. When I get home, then I plan to share the plane. I mean, by that time, it'll have its own history, and we'll take it to air shows like Oshkosh and other good ones. Maybe if I put it back on wheels and take it to Longmont. Anyway, so my last chart is, of course, I can't do this myself. Of course, I take donations, but my main hope today actually would be to meet with you folks that know lots of people and see if there's any ideas you might have for corporate sponsorship for this project, or really anything that you think might be helpful to get me there. I know that while the aircraft is entirely made out of wood, there's many metal parts that I will have to make out of by a mill and learn how to do those things. I'm kind of an accomplished woodworker, but I'll be a novice metal worker, and so I could use help or advice in that regard as well. My website there is in the lower right-hand corner. I would encourage you to go check it out. It's theseriousproject.org. There is a .com and things like that, so make sure you remember the .org part. Actually, Jerry, that's all I got.
Wasn't their flight sponsored by
Sponsored
CBS or somebody?
It was the second trip. He did very much as a consultant for Pan Am. Pan Am was the airline at the time that was trying to set up transcontinental air routes. Keep in mind that no aircraft back then were pressurized, and so going above about 8,000 feet would make everybody sick in the airplane. And so they needed to have help finding routes through the mountain ranges instead of just buzzing over them like we do now. But he actually funded all the fuel and the trip himself, but he was a consultant for the airlines.
By then, though, he was probably fairly well healed after the trip across the Atlantic.
Absolutely.
Another question for you. Was their destination Shanghai or Nanking?
Well, I think when they got to Shanghai, or got to China, they were asked to go to Nanking for help with the relief.
They intended to go to Shanghai but never made it.
That was my understanding.
Okay, well, I was going to make that correction. I was going to correct two things in the newsletter, and that was one. They didn't get to Shanghai, they went to Nanking. Shanghai was my old stomping ground, so I was 4 years old. But what was the other one? Oh, about her. It said that she was pregnant with a baby who was later kidnapped. And that's not true. She may have been pregnant, but the baby who was kidnapped was already born. They left him behind when they made this trip. So that was it. Those are the two corrections I was going to make on the newsletter article, but we'll try to get them right. Anyway, thank you very much.
Sure, any questions for me?
What engine you putting in?
I want to put a Pratt & Whitney 1340. There's many variants of that engine. I would like to get the 600 horsepower in there just to get as close to 700 as I can. The engine that he has on there is a Pratt & Whitney 1820, and it's not supported today. If I